Welcome, ladies, gentlemen, and everyone in between to the Movie Squib channel. I'm your host, Charlie, and today I'm going to be discussing 3 movies that I enjoy and everyone else absolutely hates. Now, these are movies that usually when someone talks about them, everybody agrees that it is an awful movie, and secretly, you know you like it, and you just say nothing. Now, I've got quite a bit of these movies, but I've decided to focus on these 3 movies for now. I actually had a really difficult time with this list, because there were some movies that I began to include and then had to remove. Let me give you an example. Originally, I was going to put Ang Lee's The Hulk on my list because I really enjoyed that movie, despite the awful CGI. I just enjoyed the emotion. I enjoyed Nick Nolte's performance. Eric Bana was really bland, but otherwise the movie was great. But after taking a look online, I noticed that the movie isn't awful, and there's quite a bit of people that actually enjoy it. I felt the same way about Man of Steel. I was going to include Man of Steel, but there's quite a bit of people that actually like that movie, so it was difficult for me to narrow down a list, but I think these 3 definitely fall into the list of awful movies that most people did not enjoy, except for possibly the last one, because I have met people who enjoyed the last movie on my list, but we'll see. You can comment below and you can let me know if I'm wrong and this is a well-liked movie, but I always thought that it was a box office bomb and nobody really liked it because the story was so different than what it was meant to be. But let's go ahead and start with the first movie on my list. Now, I think you're definitely going to agree that this movie is generally disliked, and that is Planet of the Apes. Tim Burton's Planet of the Apes. Now, this movie came out in 2001, directed by Tim Burton, starring Mark Wahlberg. I don't understand why they chose him. But it has some other fantastic actors in it, like Tim Roth, Helena Bonham Carter, Michael Clark Duncan, Paul Giamatti, Estella Warren. I mean, just a great cast. And then they put Mark Wahlberg at the top of that. I have no idea what Tim Burton was thinking. I'm thinking of this movie with Johnny Depp and it would have been 10 times better, but, well, here we are. So, before I start and get to the plot of this movie, I just want to say that I was researching a bit about this movie, and apparently there was an earlier script and it was going to have Arnold Schwarzenegger play a scientist that discovers a virus. So basically, he was going to play the part of, what's his name? James Franco. So basically, Arnold Schwarzenegger was going to play the part of James Franco, which I find hilarious. By the way, do you remember the last time he played a scientist in the movie? I know I do, and I wish I never did. So this production of this movie had quite a bit of mess. At one point, Oliver Stone was attached to the movie. You know, like I said, Arnold Schwarzenegger was going to make it. They tried to get Sam Raimi attached to the movie, and he said no. I mean, absolutely insane. And then finally, they got Tim Burton, and Tim Burton made this movie. Fun fact, this movie was originally going to be made with the effects of Stan Winston, and Stan Winston is a legend, but they ended up going with Rick Baker for the costume and effects, and again, Rick Baker is an absolute legend as well. I'm not playing favorites, but I do have a bit of a soft spot for Rick Baker. He's just come out with some of my favorite designs of monsters, and well, you only need to look at this to see how great he is. Let's go ahead and get to the plot of this movie. I'm going to try to simplify this because it's nothing special, but basically Mark Wahlberg plays a space astronaut, if you can believe that, and they're doing some type of research with monkeys going into these pods. There's this magnetic storm that pops up, and one of the monkeys in the pods goes into the storm, and then something happens. They lose contact with him, so Mark Wahlberg decides to go in after him, and he goes in and he can't find them, and then Mark Wahlberg lands on this planet which is ruled by apes, and humans are slaves, and apes can talk, and they use horses for transportation, and they have these cool little cities, and they wear leather jackets, and it is fantastic. So Mark Wahlberg gets captured, and he gets put in with these other slaves. He ends up getting sold to Ari. She's played by Helena Bonham Carter, and she's basically sympathetic to the humans. Everybody else treats the humans like total crap, but she feels like they're very much mistreated and they should be treated with dignity and respect. Mark Wahlberg ends up escaping with the other humans. There's this fantastic sex scene in this movie with Paul Giamatti and his wife, and it is so hilarious, and I absolutely love it. I can't tell you how much this scene makes me laugh. Now, you've got General Thade and Colonel Attar, played by Tim Roth and Michael Clark Duncan, and they are fantastic in this movie. Again, fantastic actors, and then they put Mark Wahlberg at the top of the ticket. Why? Why would you do that? Oh, man. So General Thade and the Colonel end up chasing after the humans, and they end up in this big fight. But before they do, they find this temple, and within this temple, they find remains of the space station. So what happens is whoever entered in first comes out last. So the little chimp entered that magnetic storm first, so he's the last to arrive in this movie, and then Mark Wahlberg was the second to arrive through the magnetic storm, and then finally later on the space station was sucked into the magnetic storm, and it turns out the space station has been there for thousands of years. The scientists aboard the space station were taken over by the monkeys. I don't understand how. Every time I think about it in my head, I'm like, didn't they have them in cages? Like, how did they overtake the scientists? Like, why? It's so stupid. So there you have it. That's how the entire civilization started. I know, it's not really the strongest of stories, but still, it's really fun. So what ends up happening is finally the little chimp arrives down from space, and everybody thinks he's a god, or I guess that the apes think that he's a god, but everybody basically stops fighting. And then, of course, Thade decides to continue on. There's a little battle, and the monkey gets hurt, but he's okay. And Mark Wahlberg tricks Thade into going into the pod, and that's where Thade is captured, and he's scared because he shoots a laser and it scares him. It's so stupid. So basically Mark Wahlberg decides to leave, and he gets in the pod that the monkey was in. He's going to go in through the same storm that he went through. Ari promises to take care of the little monkey. So that was a haphazard explanation of the plot, and there's more, and you probably won't watch it, but that's okay. So let me just talk a little bit about why I enjoyed this movie. Number one, the costumes and the practical effects and the makeup and the designs. Again, Rick Baker, the mastermind behind the Gremlins designs, and I mean, he's just, I don't know, like, I really enjoyed the design of these apes. I'm not saying that the newer Planet of the Apes movies were awful. They were actually quite good. But again, You're talking to somebody here who loves practical effects over CGI. And as good as the new Planet of the Apes movies were, I'll take practical effects anytime. But I'll agree, this movie is nowhere as good as the newer Planet of the Apes movies. Those were pretty well written and they're very good, but I still like this movie, so suck it. So yeah, so costumes, the set designs, I just love the world building that Tim Burton created here. I don't know, it's one of the things that I really enjoy about the movie. The actors were another big draw for me. These actors, they put on this makeup which probably took about 4 hours to put on, and it probably took an hour to take off. And I just gotta give them credit for that because it's got to be so difficult to be under all that makeup and all that latex and act. And then on top of that, sometimes they're outside in the blazing sun. I just think that when an actor puts all that effort in, like, I truly appreciate it. Even though this movie didn't do well, I appreciate the fact that these actors did so much for this movie. I think that that's something that I'm gonna sorely miss because I don't see many actors putting on makeup for 4 or 6 hours anymore. They just don't want to do it. They'd rather just let CGI do the work. And that's kind of upsetting, but there's a part of me that understands, but I will never be able to give them the respect that I give these people in this movie for doing what they did. So the set designs, the costumes, the faces, the facial animations, the acting, Tim Roth, Michael Clark Duncan, Paul Giamatti, the hilarious scenes in the movie, I just enjoyed all of it. Now, I didn't mention the final part of the movie, and that's that Mark Wahlberg ends up landing on a planet that is ruled by General Thade. They show him on a Lincoln statue when he arrives, and then all these ape police show up. It doesn't make any sense, and a lot of the actors apparently agreed that it didn't make any sense, which is why I was a bit hesitant to include it, but I guess I should be honest with you, there was a pretty dumb ending, although, I don't know, I would have liked to see more of it. I like the wackiness of this movie. I like the schlockiness of this movie. Look, the newer Planet of the Apes was serious and it had emotion and it had heart, and I appreciate that, but I also appreciate the comical and schlocky and practical effect design of this Planet of the Apes. I guess I just like both of them. So let's move to the next movie on my list, and that is John Carpenter's Ghost of Mars. Oh, I just noticed that this movie also came out in 2001. Oh my god, what is wrong with me? John Carpenter's Ghost of Mars. It stars Natasha Henstridge. Now, if you don't know who Natasha Henstridge is, she's the lead star in the movie Species, and if you haven't watched those movies, you gotta watch them. They're fantastic. They're schlock 1990s sci-fi fun fest. Friday night, Saturday night, grab a few beers. I actually like the second movie more than I like the first. I'm gonna have to do a video on that because most people will definitely disagree that the second movie is superior to the first, but I like the second one. What can I say? I like garbage? Is that what I'm saying? Oh god, this is not gonna go well. Okay, so we've got Natasha Henstridge, we've got Ice Cube, I don't need to explain him. We've got Jason Statham in this movie, and okay, fun fact, he was actually going to play the role that Ice Cube played, but at the time they decided that they needed more star power, and that's why they put Ice Cube in the role, which is funny because now today Jason Statham is definitely more of a box office draw than Ice Cube. But that's no disrespect to Ice Cube. I definitely enjoyed him in 21 and 22 Jump Street. He was absolutely hilarious in those movies. So we've got Pam Grier. She's a legend. I love her. I love Foxy Brown. I mean, oh man, such a good movie. You've got Clea Duvall. Now, she's been in a couple of movies, but what I remember her from is the movie The Faculty. That's the movie with Jon Stewart and, Elijah Wood. And the guy from, oh God, I can't remember his name. Josh Hartnett. There you go. Okay, so here's the plot for Ghost of Mars. Natasha Hendricks, she ends up having to go in front of some tribunal, and she has to explain the events that happened on the colony that she was previously in. So through a series of flashbacks and flashbacks and flashbacks, we end up uncovering the events of what occurred in this outpost. So what happens is Natasha Hendricks and her team arrives at this place. It's completely desolate except for a group of prisoners who have locked themselves in some cells, and they're basically afraid because all the miners have gone crazy and they attack. What's going on is that they're being invaded by these alien ghosts. That's right, folks. This movie has alien ghosts in it. These alien ghosts will invade your body, and then you start going crazy. You start destroying your own body and ripping yourself apart. It's kind of reminiscent of Return of the Living Dead 3 with the girl in the movie. Anyway, so the prisoners band together, and then they also discover Ice Cube. Ice Cube is some big-time criminal that the government is looking to transfer. Two of his friends end up trying to help him escape, and they are basically the comic relief of the movie, but they're kind of funny. I actually enjoyed them. There's this really funny scene with one of them that, I mean, just always cracks me up, where he chops his own hand off. What a jackass. Oh man. Anyway, they all band together and they decide to fight these feral miners. There's this one leader of the feral miners. He kind of looks a little bit like Marilyn Manson in a monkey suit. It's kind of funny. But anyway, they end up fighting them off. They lose a bunch of men in the process. Natasha's character actually gets infected by one of these alien ghosts. Anytime they kill a person infected by this alien ghost, it ends up just leaving the body and going into someone else. So Natasha's character ends up getting infected. They take her outside and they leave her to die. But Ice Cube ends up giving her a pill from her secret stash. She's a bit of a junkie. And what happens is she begins to hallucinate, and because of that, the alien spirit decides to leave her body. So she actually survives. Now, she ends up getting back in. There's this big fight. They end up deciding to go on the train. So they're about to leave on the train, but they decide to blow the nuclear power plant, so they destroy everything. Although they're not really sure if that's going to destroy the alien spirits. I doubt that it would. But they decide to blow everything up and they initiate the meltdown. Now Ice Cube, he decides to leave before the authorities arrest him, and he escapes. And then we're back at the very beginning where they're at the tribunal. Now, after the tribunal, Natasha wakes up to the sound of alarms. Of course, the alien spirits have arrived there and they're taking over. Got Ice Cube, he comes there and he hands her these ridiculous chrome. They look so silly. I have to imagine that Ice Cube must have been the one that asked for it. That Ice Cube went to John Carpenter and was like, hey, John, you know what would be really cool? If I had these really bright chrome Uzis. Oh, God, Ice Cube, what is wrong with you? I still love you, though. So the two agree to fight their way out of the city, and then there you have it. Now, let's talk about why I like this movie. Number one, I love John Carpenter. I mean, he's made some real stinkers, but the man is a legend. He's made some really great movies in our lifetime, and I mean, well, look at Scream. It's doing phenomenal still after 6 movies. Lucky guy. This movie actually didn't do too well. It bombed at the box office, but I enjoyed it. He did the soundtrack for this movie. If you know anything about John Carpenter, he does a lot of his soundtracks, and normally they're more synthesizers, but this movie had a lot more guitar and heavy metal to it. But I enjoyed it. I enjoy both of his styles. You know, this movie came out when grunge and rock music was still at its peak. So for me, when this movie came out, I just loved the soundtrack to it. You've got some really good star power here. Jason Statham. Natasha Henstridge, of course, has not done anything big lately, but at the time, she was pretty popular, especially with the Species movies. I wouldn't consider Ice Cube to be a big box office draw, but he did very well in this movie. I mean, he's got a type that he plays in these movies, and you can kind of see it because it's a little bit the same in 2122 Jump Street, but he plays them well, and I enjoyed him in this movie. Pam Grier didn't get much time in this movie, but it's always a joy to see her. Now, I can understand the criticism of this movie. I mean, it's set in a dark lit area. A lot of it kind of doesn't make any sense. There's the flashbacks within flashbacks, which is kind of annoying, but I genuinely enjoyed this movie. I genuinely enjoyed the plot of it. I love the actors. I love the soundtrack. I mean, some of the costumes were pretty good. It wasn't anything as stand out as Planet of the Apes, but pretty good job in my opinion. And there you have it, Ghost of Mars. And now for the final film of my top 3 awful films that I enjoy. Now this one may be a bit controversial because I don't know if it really is a hated film, but the movie that I love that most people around me do not at all like is the movie Hook. Now, the movie Hook came out in 1991. It was directed by Steven Spielberg, and it starred Robin Williams, Dustin Hoffman, Julia Roberts, Bob Hoskins. It was a movie that was destined to do well, and it did not do well at all. But before I praise and gush this movie, let me try to summarize this as best as possible. And I am going to try to keep this as short as I can because I encourage you to watch this movie. It's incredibly interesting. It's a completely different take on Peter Pan, and there's just something magical about this movie. There's something that I just adore. So let me try to get into the plot of this movie. So Peter Pan is real, and Wendy is real, and everything that happened with Peter Pan really did happen, and it was written down by a neighbor and passed off as fiction. Now, here's the interesting thing. This movie doesn't take place while Peter Pan is a kid. This movie actually takes place when he's a middle-aged adult, and he's married and has 2 kids of his own. And he's completely forgot that he was Peter Pan. Now, Wendy, she's an older lady, and basically what happens is Wendy continuously got older as she kept going back to her homeworld, and Peter never got older. So at one point, Wendy just became too old to have adventures with him. And then he saw Wendy's granddaughter, and he decided at that point that he didn't want to be a kid anymore. He wanted to actually become an adult and have children and be married. And so he stayed in the real world and he grew up and he completely forgot that he was Peter Pan. He's basically become a bit of a dick. He has 2 kids and he's not an abusive dad, but he's one of those dads that is completely engulfed in work and is not paying any attention to his children. He's got a loving wife, and the wife does what she can to take care of the kids, but you can see that they want to be with him, they want to play with him, and he's just not interested at all. So he ends up going back to England, and he goes to see Wendy. She's about to receive some type of humanitarian award, and then all hell breaks loose. Basically, Hook invades the real world, although they never explain how, and he goes to the home while Wendy and the parents are off at the reception, and he ends up kidnapping his kids. Again, it's never explained how he knows that Peter is there and that is his children, but he ends up kidnapping his kids. So the parents get home and they call the police. Toodles tells them that Hook is back. Of course, the adults don't believe it, but Wendy ends up pulling Peter aside and she explains to him that he's the real Peter Pan and that Hook kidnapped his children and he needs to learn to fly in order to save him. And naturally, he thinks that she has gone completely insane. And to be fair, I don't blame him, because if you drop that kind of info on me, I would completely not believe it. Anyway, later on, he's drunk and he goes up into the attic, and that's when Tinkerbell comes in. Tinkerbell is trying to convince him to fly. Of course, he doesn't believe it, but Tinkerbell has had enough and she ends up knocking him out and taking him to Never Never Land. Now, there's some fantastic set pieces here. I mean, oh man, with the ship and the costumes with the pirates. I don't understand why Tinkerbell ends up dropping him off with the pirates. Apparently she just got tired, so she decided to rest there, which is the worst place in all of Neverland to rest. I mean, you could have literally just rested on top of a mountain and that would have been safer than where she landed. There's this hilarious fight scene. Tinkerbell ends up disguising Peter, and then they meet face to face with Hook. Hook is played by Dustin Hoffman, and I think he does such a fantastic job. I mean, he really sells the role. I mean, he's really into it. I commend him for hamming it up. So he tries to get Peter to remember because he wants a good, fair, and honest fight with Peter Pan. He wants a war with Peter Pan and the Lost Boys. He doesn't want to fight this adult who doesn't remember. So Tinkerbell ends up making a deal with Hook. She asks for 3 days to get him in shape and get him to fly and fight and crow. And Hook agrees because Hook wants nothing more than to kill Peter Pan at his peak. So Peter ends up getting knocked off the boat and he ends up getting saved by mermaids in one of the best ways possible. Like, I definitely gotta visit Never Never Land. So he ends up making it to the Lost Boys' home and he ends up making a complete fool of himself. Rufio is the new leader of the Lost Boys and he's pretty much like a punk badass. You know what? Now that I remember, he was in the movie The Perfect Weapon. Do you remember that movie? It was like a martial arts movie. So Rufio doesn't want to give up the sword to Peter, but he does agree to train him. And the Lost Boys do everything that they can to get him to fly, to fight, and to crow, but he just can't do it. Like, his heart is not into it. He can't remember. And then he ends up seeing his kids, and it seems like his kids are having fun and they've forgotten about him. So he really tries to remember, and as he's really trying his hardest, he ends up finding the old tree where he used to hang out with the original Lost Boys. He remembers his mother, which that can't happen. That's not real. But then again, we're talking about Peter Pan and Never Never Land, so you got to suspend disbelief, but still, this is a bit too far-fetched. Anyway, he remembers his mother, and apparently his mother was talking about how she's going to send him to all the great schools, and he didn't want that, so he magically pushed the cart down a hill, and the mother didn't look for him? What the fuck? What? How? Like, I can't imagine that stroller went farther than 100 feet. So if she's, I mean, what happened? Why? Tinkerbell ends up finding him and she takes him to Never Never Land, and then that's where he meets Wendy. And then he remembers finally his happy thoughts, and his happy thoughts are his children, because he wanted to grow up, he wanted to have children. And so he finds his happy thoughts, he flies, he fights, he crows. Oh man, I love it. He looks great in those tights, by the way. I could never do that. Rufio recognizes that Peter Pan is back and he gives up the sword, but Peter Pan ends up immediately making friends with Rufio. And I just love that. I love that there was no animosity and they just immediately banded together and they fight and they fly and they crow. Fantastic. I should mention that there's this really weird scene between Tinkerbell and Peter Pan where basically Tinkerbell seduces Peter Pan and she kisses Peter Pan. By the way, he's still married. I understand that they're in different worlds, but that's not gonna fly when he tells Moira. Who am I kidding? He's not gonna tell Moira what happens in Never Neverland stays in Never Neverland. So Tinkerbell ends up kissing him. She obviously loves him. And to be fair, even though this scene is kind of silly, it makes sense because Tinkerbell is not a child. I mean, she's not a human either, but you gotta realize that she is an adult. And for all these years, she's been with Peter Pan, so it makes sense that she loves him more than just a friend. But she realizes that she can't be with him because he's married, he's happily married, and he has these kids, and he has to go save his kids. And so as much as this scene is criticized, I kind of sympathize with her. I understand that she loved him more than just a kid, and she wanted to be with him. She wanted to be Moira. I don't know, there's a bit of tragedy to that. Anyway, she decides to just push him away, and then he goes and saves his kids. The Lost Boys get geared up in this fantastic makeshift gear, and they use these weapons that are like non-violent. And honestly, it's fantastic. I love all of the effort that went into these props. I feel like you're never gonna see that again. And if you do see that again, it's all gonna be CGI. It's all gonna be CGI. Look at these props. They're so fantastic. I love this movie. I really enjoyed this movie. They end up fighting against the pirates. Rufio ends up getting killed in a very serious moment. I understand that this movie had adult elements, but this part is really dark. But I don't know, I still think that it was good to include this in the movie. I know that it doesn't fit, but I really enjoyed this scene in the movie. I enjoyed that he got serious about everything and that he called Captain Hook a murderer because, Captain Hook is killing Lost Boys. He's killing children. Of course he's a murderer. So even though his kids try to convince him to just leave, Hook tells him that he's just never gonna stop looking for him. And so Peter Pan and Hook fight. They have this epic battle. And then the crocodile that Hook ended up killing that took his hand is made as a clock but still alive. And he falls on Hook and eats him because there's a burp at the end here. This part was weird. I don't understand how the crocodile is still alive when it appears that the crocodile was stuffed. But yeah, the crocodile's still alive. I can't imagine that the crocodile is gonna live much longer with that gigantic hole in its gut. But that's how Hook dies. I think they wanted to make it that way because really, you can't have Peter Pan stab Captain Hook. That's a bit extreme. Peter Pan takes his kids and he goes home. He makes the fat kid here in charge. I love this fat kid here. He's so adorable. He tells a story about how his happy place is his mother, and it's so sweet. So he makes him the leader of the Lost Boys, and Peter Pan and his kids go home. There's this hilarious interaction at the end because the kids think maybe it's all a dream, but it's not, and it's really sweet. And then finally, he gives Toodles his marbles, and there's a bit of fairy dust, and Toodles flies away, and there is the end. I really enjoyed this movie. It really puts a feeling into my heart. I remember first watching this movie on cable, and I was just immediately enthralled. I love the idea of Peter Pan being an adult. I was obviously a lot younger, so I love the trash talking in the movie. I love the set designs. I love the flying, of course. Like when he's flying, that sword is just so sweet. I remember seeing this movie when I was younger, and I just fell in love with it. And I still love it to this day. I watched it as recently as a month ago. I think I've seen this movie like 10 or 12 times. And every time I see it, I just get this feeling of nostalgia. Let's talk about Robin Williams. Like, his performance in this movie is fantastic. He's so reserved when he's an adult, and then when he finally remembers that he's Peter Pan, he's just wild and out. Oh man, I love the duality that he played in this movie. There's just something about it. Like when he begins to loosen up at the dinner scene and he imagines the food and he's finally eating. Oh man, he really sells this movie. I so much enjoy him. I really miss him in a sense that I miss his acting. I think he was just such a great actor. It is so tragic the way he passed away, and oh man. Okay, of course, the set designs. I actually really enjoyed Dustin Hoffman. He really sold this character. I mean, he really played into it. The part where he's about to kill himself is just absolutely hilarious, which also leads me into Bob Hoskins. Like, he really played this character dirty, and in the end of the movie, he ends up trying to steal jewels and riches and leaves because he sees the writing on the wall. He sees that Hook is done for. And they do show him at the end of the movie, and he's pretending to be a street worker. It doesn't make any sense. Either he's pretending because he's hiding out there, or you know what? I'm going to go with the theory that he's just pretending to be that street worker there, and that he is actually Smee. He took all the jewels with him, and he's just going to live out his days on Earth rich. And I tell you what, smart thinking on Smee's part. I know that people didn't like Julia Roberts as Tinkerbell. I really didn't see a problem with her. I mean, I don't know. Maybe there could have been a better actress, but I'm okay with Julia Roberts in this role. I don't see any problem with her. Again, I really enjoyed that scene where she became human-sized and she kissed Peter Pan. Like, it was just a different side to Peter Pan that I enjoy. And I think that's where I'm going to lead off into now, is that this is just a unique story. We've seen so many iterations of Peter Pan. I can't watch another Peter Pan movie. I think there's another one coming out again, and I am not interested at all. I don't want to see another Peter Pan. We've done so many of them. Why? Let's just move on. Move on to something different. There has to be more characters out there that you can explore, or something different. And that's why I enjoyed this movie. It is so different than all the other iterations of Peter Pan. It tells a version of Peter Pan that he grew up, that he moved on, but there's still something in him that he left out and he forgot. When Peter Pan starts out, he's happy, he's a lost boy, he's on these adventures, and then he sees Wendy, and she's old, and I'm assuming that he's thinking to himself, why would you get old? Like, you can't do these adventures anymore, you can't have fun, your bones are aching, you're gonna die soon, why? And I think he gets it. He sees her granddaughter, and something in him gets it, that life isn't about just standing still and doing the same thing over. It's about exploring new things. And life itself is an adventure, as he says at the end. And there's something so sweet about that. There's something that I feel like that's almost lost today. Everybody always says that everything sucks and that everything is going to crap and nothing is good anymore and the good old days are gone. And you know what? Life is what you make it. And this movie is one of the inspirations for me to move on in my life and to continue moving forward and to continue exploring and to do it with happiness. It's so interesting that this movie can affect me in such a way, and then I turn around and see that it was a box office flop and most people don't like it. It's so funny that movies can do that to you, isn't it? One person can see a movie and they just see an awful movie or a movie that just was mediocre, and then another person can see that movie and just be so affected by it. And Hook was that movie for me. I mean, every time I see it, I know that it is member berries, but it's member berries that give me a warm, fuzzy feeling on the inside. And there's just something I love about those type of movies. It's like a warm blanket. You just sit there, you watch it, you feel comforted by it, you have a smile on your face. That's what this movie does. It just puts that smile on my face. Rest in peace, Robin Williams. You will be missed. So, now you've got 3 movies that were critically panned, generally hated, but I very much enjoyed. Although I must say that Hook will probably be a controversial movie. And if it is, sound off below. Let me know if you enjoyed that movie as I did. When I see that movie, I just have a smile on my face from beginning to end, and it just puts me in such a good mood. It puts me in such a happy place. I hope that you enjoyed this video. I love talking about these type of movies. These movies that people just really don't like, but there's something about them that I enjoy. And I plan on talking a little bit more about those type of movies. I've got House of Wax almost complete. I'm doing a separate video on it, and I'm not trying to drag it out, but there's a little bit I want to discuss because there's a bunch of elements of that movie that I really enjoy. Oh, but I'm talking about a completely different movie on this video. I'm sorry. If you like this content, hit the like, hit the subscribe, comment below, do whatever you want. I hope you keep watching. Thank you for your time. And you all have a lovely day or evening. Goodbye.
So, your adventures are over.
Oh no. To live will be an awfully big adventure.